Welcome to the Big Life Podcast. I'm Neal Oates Jr., and I want to start by saying this. If you found your way here, it's likely because you care deeply about doing things well, about showing up, about carrying responsibility with integrity. This podcast exists for people who are building something meaningful and are thoughtful enough to notice when success starts to feel heavier than expected. Today, Robin and I are going to be talking about capability because capability is usually framed as a strength. It opens doors, it earns trust, it creates momentum. But over time, if it goes unexamined, capability can quietly become the thing that limits your freedom instead of expanding it.
And I'm Robin Lewis, and I'm really glad that you're joining us today. This space is intentionally slower and more reflective than a lot of the other conversations that we have here on this podcast. It's meant to give language to things that you may already be sensing and feeling, but maybe you haven't articulated it yet. So capability is one of those things. Most people don't talk about the emotional experience of being capable. You know, we talk about competence or skill or results, but we rarely talk about what it feels like to always be the one who can handle more, think further ahead, or absorb the complexity of situations that oftentimes others don't see, and so on.
Okay, so Robin, it's good to see you, sir. I'm excited for this episode. But what you're talking about is something I have felt personally. And so here's what I've come to realize. In the early stages of growth, being capable feels like alignment. You know, you're using those gifts that God has given you. You're learning, you're contributing. And here's the part that got me. People notice. They came to me with bigger responsibilities. They trusted me more and they had higher expectations. But at some point, something shifted. At least it did with me. Maybe the audience, you can identify with this. That's when your capability stops being something you offer and starts being something that is assumed. You know, decisions come to you by default, like that final decision comes to you by default. Problems just land in our lap, and without realizing it, you become the container for things that were never intentionally placed there.
I've certainly been there as well, Neal, and that's where I think the internal tension begins. Because on one level, you know, you're grateful, right? Things are happening. You're grateful for where you are and your capabilities. But you know you've been given opportunities along the way. You've worked hard. But then on another level, you feel stretched in ways that maybe rest alone is not going to solve. You know, you have this continued need for rest. And that's it. That's an important note, because this isn't about being tired in a physical sense, but it's about a mental load that we carry, right? An emotional load. And the weight of being the one that others rely on, often without realizing how much they're relying on you. I've felt it. Maybe our listeners have felt it as well.
And here's what I have come to learn and experience and now looking to overcome and to readjust is that one of the subtle costs of capability is that it reduces choice. And you're saying, but Neal, I know here on The Big Life, we're talking about choice and freedom and opportunity to fully go after this thing. But the more capable we become, if we aren't careful, it can reduce choice, and not immediately, but gradually. And we don't wake up one day trapped. We wake up one day surrounded by commitments that made sense initially, but collectively, when you put all of those commitments together, they demand more than we intended to give. And it's because, or let me say, because we're capable, we keep saying yes. I know this is something that I've battled with. And we don't say yes out of obligation, but out of identity. I know I can do it. You know you can do it. You know it will get done if you handle it. Over time, I can replaces I should. And that's a very big distinction that we must be aware of, and a choice that we must make so that we can have more choices down the line.
I couldn't agree more. And I think our listeners will relate to this because, when I can becomes the primary filter, then your inner world starts to shrink. Reflection gets replaced by reaction. You ever been there, our listeners? Discernment gets replaced by urgency. Right? And even though things may be working externally, internally, there's often a quiet loss of clarity, identity. People describe this as feeling scattered, or restless, or, unable to enjoy what they've built. And not because it isn't good, but because it's become heavy. Right, Neal?
Absolutely. And Robin, I know that as we are playing this or recording this episode, we're into the new year of 2026. And so I had to go back, and as we were doing our reviews and we walked people through the 30-day process, I had to ask myself, where did my I shoulds get replaced by I can? And I had to do that adjustment, those tweaks. I really had to do that internal work that you were just discussing, because I found out, or I'm a victim of the, oh, sure, I can, and not obligation. But as I mentioned, identity. And so that was a very big deal and a real wake up call for me at the onset of 2026, here only a couple of weeks in. But Robin and audience, what I want to remind us of, or what I want to stress here, is another cost. So this is another cost that doesn't get talked about enough. And that is how capability affects connection. We here at The Big Life, we're all about connection. Robin and I, we value our connection with each other, with our connection with you as our audience. But when people see you as strong and dependable, they often assume that you're fine. And we know how dangerous assumptions can be. What happens is they don't ask how you're really doing. I might see Robin and say, Robin, how are you doing? And then he'll say, fine. And then we have this habit of asking each other, how are you really doing, brother? And that's the one, right? But if our people always see us, since we're capable, as being fine, and they don't really ask us how we're really doing, over time, we may stop offering that honesty to ourselves, because we don't want to complicate things or burden others. So when someone asks you, how are you really doing? We just say, they see me as capable. I'm just going to tell them that I'm fine. And here's what happens. That can lead to a kind of isolation that's hard to explain. You're surrounded by people, but carrying things alone. You have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And that's why we might be restless, as you mentioned earlier, Robin.
It's so true. And that isolation isn't caused by a lack of care, right? Because the people around us care about us, but it's caused by a lack of visibility. Because capability means that you're looking solid, right? Even when you might be processing uncertainty internally, externally, we're not showing that. We're not presenting that. And what we see happen again and again is that capable people don't lack wisdom or insight. What they lack is space to think, space to feel, space to ask deeper questions about how they're living and leading. And so this capable version of ourselves sort of can camouflage that. And so that's where we might become isolated now.
And Robin, to that point, I believe this is where something becomes helpful and required of us, and that's reframing, right? I know that one, we want to be aware, we want to make sure we reflect, but then reframing is going to be key here. And the goal, ladies and gentlemen, we are not saying to stop being capable. That is not the answer to living the big life or dealing with this weight of these responsibilities. The goal is to contain capability. Now, this might be counterintuitive to what you've heard from leadership gurus, from success philosophers. They're like, no, you want to be as capable as possible. You want to be recognized as the authority. But here's what it means to contain capability. We want to place it inside of a structure that protects what matters most. And for many of us, I'm going to tell you here today that you matter most. You might not have heard that. You might think it's your skill or your ability to perform or to solve problems, but you, my friend, you are what matters most. So leadership matures when you move from being the one who carries everything to the one who decides what deserves to be carried at all. So this reminds me of Peter Drucker, who says there's nothing worse in life than to become exceptionally well or great at something that should not be done at all. The idea of climbing the ladder and getting to the top and realizing that is leaning against the wrong building, right? And Robin, we had this discussion before we started recording. I realized that to close out 2025, I had climbed to the top of a ladder that was leaning against the wrong building. So what we're encouraging you here now is to contain that capability. Start asking, what deserves to be carried? What should I drop? What should maybe someone else carry? That even though I'm capable, it's not my should. It's my can, but it's not my should.
Yes, sir. And that sort of shift starts with honesty, where we have to be honest with ourselves and take the time to actually ask ourselves some questions. We're not talking about dramatic change here for our listeners. We're just talking about being truthful with ourselves. And so here are some of the questions that you could ask. Is what am I carrying? Is it because it aligns with my values and my purpose? And, a lot of times we might be carrying stuff that does not align with it. And that sort of, we can drift into that, that can just happen over time. We're good meaning people and things come up and we do, like Neil said, I can. And, another question to ask ourselves is what am I carrying simply because it was never questioned? What am I carrying
Ouch.
simply because it was never questioned? Those questions aren't meant to create guilt. They're meant to restore choice. Mm. I remember there was a time in my journey that I realized that I had, like Neil, I had 4 early morning meetings. Like, I won't get into the detail, but, one of them was a networking, 2 of them was networking, and then, there was a project for one of those networking organizations that I was heading up, and so that meant another morning meeting weekly, and so there were 4 early morning meetings, and what I realized after doing this for a whole year is that I needed to stop because I didn't have the time to ask myself questions like this. You know what I mean? You know that I protect my time in the mornings now, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the places where that came from because I just allowed. I didn't question it. I was just involved, and I was just doing my thing, and it ended up being to a point where I was like burnt out, man. And I was not taking the time to evaluate and to ask these types of questions. And so, yeah, I'm relating to this. And, like as a result of that now, that's why I so very strongly protect my mornings now.
And Robin, that story right there, or should I say that example about those requirements or demands on your schedule and how it reduced choice. And then I'm sure that you're volunteering, you're doing some project work, but then you had to make some choices, or let me say, you couldn't make sound choices. And here's what I want to share about that idea of choice. Choice is what capability slowly erodes if we don't guard it, right? So we could say choice, we could talk about time, we could talk about flexibility, but choice is what brings clarity back when you reclaim it. So
Oh,
when you
true.
made that decision to say, hey, listen, I can't do this anymore. And part of it was because we didn't question what it is or what it was that we're doing or why, or is this the best use of my time? Yes, I can meet, but should I? And so now being able to reclaim not only the choice, but the power that comes with those choices is something that we as achievers, as strivers, that we really do value. And here's what I want to say to the audience. As we continue to move through the Big Life podcast in 2026 and beyond. Robin and I, we are committed to you, our audience, you, our listeners, and our viewers. And we're going to keep naming these invisible pressures, these things that might be holding you back, or the things that you don't know how to articulate, that Robin mentioned earlier on in this episode, the feeling of, am I the only one, or how do I deal with these things? And the reason we're going to keep naming these is so that we can take that power back, so we can get our choices back, so we can become the leaders and the individuals, the business people and the family people that we know we're meant to be. It's not to make you feel behind. Our goal here is to not push you toward drastic moves. As Robin said, we're just going to ask some questions. We're going to guide you along this journey. But ultimately, our desire is to help you build awareness. And here's why Robin and I on the Big Life are so focused on awareness, because awareness creates options and options create freedom. So if we can help you become aware, and then you start looking at your options, and then you make the right choice with your options, and you start experiencing freedom, it's our understanding, our belief, that's what's going to lead you to the big life.
Right on. Freedom doesn't come from doing less for the sake of doing less, right? Like Neal, you and I are busy people. We're not talking about here, and I think you said it earlier, continuing to go for it and to go after it. But freedom comes from being aligned and doing what's aligned with intention. So, when capability serves clarity instead of replacing it, life starts to feel sustainable again. If you're in that place where that freedom doesn't come from doing less, it comes from being aligned. And so that's why we need to take the time to really ponder those questions and see where we are. We're all capable of drift. We're all, and then life happens, right, Neal? So there are things that happen in our life that's going to pull us away. And, there are things that we do need our attention. There are legitimate things in life that are going to pull us away from whatever intention, focus that we have, right? So life happens. Let's state that. But that's all the more reason for us to really make sure that we are aligned.
I couldn't think of a better way, ladies and gentlemen, for us to continue the journey down this road towards the big life as we are here in the month of January of the new year. Now, before I continue, Robin, I do want to ask you, only a couple of weeks ago, everyone was preparing for this new year. They had the energy, and it was 26 is going to be better than 2025. And I have not asked you this on camera or even recording so far. So our date of recording this, we're a couple weeks into January. How are you feeling about the new year, brother?
Yeah, I'm feeling good, man. There's some things that I pulled away from 2025, pulled from, that I'm addressing a little bit differently this year. For me, I need to be a little bit more intentional, a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more consistent in some of the areas that I need to focus on. And, so that's kind of my emphasis for this year is really being focused on creating those habits and following through with them. I feel good about some of the things that we've accomplished last year, and we've already started off this year with some good stuff that we're doing. So I'm in a good place, man. Thank you for asking, sir. How about you?
So I am, fortunately and unfortunately, I'm right there with you, because I did go in and do my review, but I am with you. And ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress enough, find yourself a success partner to do life with, because Robin and I, we have these conversations, and I swear it's like we're reading from each other's playbook and notes and manuals. So I'm there with you. I am excited about the year. I am more of a stoic when it comes to looking at the past, and I'm saying, okay, we did good here. There's room for improvement. I missed the mark in some areas. You talked about a few words: discipline, intention, and consistency. All words that I have to implement, and not because we didn't have them in 2025, but our goals for 2026 are up there, and we know what's required. But here's what I will tell you, even as I heard you, it's encouraging to know that even with the successes that we have, that I'm yoked with someone who is still willing to pull the plow with me, right? Someone who is still in this thing and saying, yeah, we did some good stuff and we've done some good stuff this year in the first few weeks of 2026, but I know that the future is going to be brighter. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's from Robin and my heart that we say that if you're still here, you have more to do. Now, we're not trying to put more responsibility on. That's an encouragement, not more work. We're talking more impact, more purpose. So before we close out, I want to remind you that we're grateful that you spend time with us on every episode. I am going to encourage you, if this is your first time listening to or watching the Big Life Podcast, go back and binge watch all of the episodes. It's fantastic information. And this is not coming from Robin and myself. This is coming from reviews, viewers, listeners who are saying that the Big Life has and is making a difference. So if today's conversation resonated, let it sit with you. You don't need to resolve anything immediately. Robin, Neal, we are not telling you go out, drastic change today. No, we're saying simply noticing the cost is a meaningful step. And so we want you to slow down, review, reflect, maybe reframe some things. Robin, before we go, is there anything you want to say to the audience before we close out this episode, sir?
Yeah, I think it's such a beautiful thing as we start the year again to, we start off with these goals and a commitment to making them happen. I think a good practice is to review, right? We have to reassess. The truth is that we're all capable of taking on more I cans rather than I should. It's very easy for us to get distracted, or it's very easy for us to not be, doing exactly the things that we need to do. Or sometimes there are things that can get in the way of that would need for us to stop, reassess, make adjustments, and move forward. I think that's a beautiful thing about the end of the year or any cycle like that we have. Neal and I spoke about before coming on this show today that one of the things that I am readjusting is when I review my week. Reviewing on a weekly basis, I find to be very meaningful because I can catch the things that, I may have had good intentions about, or maybe there's somebody that I needed to follow up with that I didn't, or you just go on and you can see so many things that could happen that if we don't review, sometimes we might miss. So like Neal, the reason why it came to me is because you mentioned it's good to be together with somebody where you're equally yoked, something along those lines. Well, one of the things that I've discovered is that the best of us need to review and adjust. And so, yeah, we are encouraging you today with that thought that we need to review and adjust. We all do. And so we're glad that you are here with us. All the best for you for 2026. And thank you for being here with us. Our commitment is to continue to add value and empower you as we get together each week.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robin Lewis, I want to tell you all that it has been a pleasure here being with you on this episode of the Big Life Podcast. Before we go, I want to remind you that we love you, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see you or you see us, we're right there with you. Peace.
Peace.
Good.